Welcome to Speaking of Grace, the weekly message podcast from the Whole Life Church in Orlando, Florida. We're a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-generational congregation committed to our mission of loving people into a lifelong friendship with God. We are committed to our vision of being a church without walls, fully engaged in serving the people of our community. Thank you for joining us as we continue Speaking of Grace.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and I'm not just a pastor. I collect Hot Wheels.
Hello, I'm Sylvia, and my hobbies include drawing, and, drawing.
It's really good to have a hobby. And the hobbies that we create in our lives do not have to be collecting all the time, like mine. They can be anything. It could be a drawing or running or something that you take time out of your regular schedule to, in a sense, not just divert, but also enjoy moments that are outside of that typical routine or that mundane schedule that you keep.
Well, I enjoy drawing because it's what's most available to me at the moment, and it's one of those things that you can't really explain. And since I put so much time and effort to it, it's not one of those things that you can just lose and start something else. Once you start drawing, you have to keep drawing.
So Hot Wheels became that. I've always had Hot Wheels since I was a kid, and I pulled them all out. And I go, wow, I got a lot of Hot Wheels. And so I thought, what I'll do is not only collect, but I also want to do something that might be beneficial to some other people. So I do restorations, and I restore Hot Wheels for other people sometimes, but also for myself and my grandkids or other kids. And it kind of brings me joy. So if you can find a hobby that not only creates that diversion, but also brings you a lot of joy, that's a pretty good mix.
Drawing has been an outlet for me because it's easier to express your feelings on a piece of paper instead of talking about it. Because for me, it's hard to talk about certain things. So I'd rather just draw it out. And because drawing is almost like a venting thing for me.
I have one car in here. It's this one right here. This is a car that I got when I was probably about 10 years old. And I got it by trading with a friend of mine. This car is in really bad shape because the guy that I got it from took all of his stuff apart. I'm lucky that he didn't take that one apart, but he crashed it so many different times. But I kept it because he taught me a lesson. And that is that we don't just take things and enjoy things. Sometimes it's really good for us to understand how they work. And so I kind of learned from him to take the cars apart at a very young age and fix them. So now the restoration includes a lot of what he taught me way back when I was 10 years old. So that's the part that kind of brings joy, is there's a creative element, but there's also a deconstruction, construction element. And I think that's the part that is therapeutic for me.
Well, hey there, family. All right. Everybody have a seat? It's a little packed today. Amen. Yeah, we like that. We do. By the way, they tell you that once a church gets past 80% full, people stop coming. I'd like you to know first service is not that full. So if you like being together, that's fine with me, but don't quit coming because there is space in first service, okay? So just letting you know. We are continuing our series on play, the family that plays together. Today we're talking about the family that embraces hobbies. And you heard Jeff and Sylvia talk about their hobbies. And here's the thing that we really need to just put out there right up front, that hobbies are good for you. They're good for you. Hobbies create mental well-being, they foster creativity and growth, and they build social bonds. Even when Sylvia's talking about drawing, you think, well, she's doing that by herself. Well, no, she's showing her art to other people. She's looking at other people's art. Hobbies almost invariably bring people together, people who are like-minded. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but The other thing, some of you are like, okay, Ken, I'm sure you're a trustworthy source, but I'd really love to hear what Harvard has to say about this. Okay, fine, I understand. So the Harvard Health Letter from January 1 of this year reported on a study that had been done on 93,000 people across 16 different countries. And this study found across these 93,000 people over these 16 countries, no matter which country you were in, compared with people who didn't have hobbies, those who did reported better health, more happiness, fewer symptoms of depression, and higher life satisfaction. Does that sound good to anybody? Sounds all right to me. So let's talk about hobbies then. You all know what a hobby is, right? I thought I did. But I did, I thought I did, but I still thought I ought to go ahead and research this. And so, of course, I went to my major research tool, Google, right? And I typed in define a hobby. And here's what cracked me up. Generally, as a pastor, if the definition is obvious, you don't really want to put it up there because it's like everybody knows that's what it is. But what surprised me was what one of the first results were that was pulled up of defining a hobby. You ready for this? The Internal Revenue Service would like you to know in IRS tax tip 2022-57, April 13, 2022. A hobby is any activity that a person pursues because they enjoy it and with no intention of making a profit. Now, I could have left the definition there, but I had to keep going because I feel it's my civic duty. If a taxpayer receives income from an activity that is carried on with no intention of making a profit, they must report the income they receive on Schedule 1, Form 1040, Line 8. You have been informed. You're welcome. You're welcome. You'll thank me when you're audited. All right. Sorry, like I said, I just had to throw that in there. It defines a hobby. There you go. All right. So, hobbies cover a lot of different areas, right? Lots of different areas. You've got your athletic and physical hobby. Who has an athletic or physical hobby that they do? So, okay, you've got your hand up. Somebody, as long as it's a church-appropriate activity, yell it out. Gym, working out. Tennis. Okay, well, slow down. You guys are too enthusiastic this morning. So, I want to go with gym. So, gym's a hobby. Raise your hand. You said it. Raise your hand. Who else has gym as a hobby? Look at each other. This might be a good small community. Okay, take your hands down. Somebody said tennis, but let's be all honest. Tennis is last century's game. We all know what it is now, right? Yeah, pickleball. Raise your hand if you're a pickleball player. Okay, why are you ashamed? I'm surprised. Most pickleball players will never shut up about it. Okay, all right. Okay, we got a few of those. All right, so let's talk about creative and crafting category. Who has a creative or craft? What do you got? What? Spray paint art. I heard scraping pavement. That's why I'd never heard of that hobby before, which is not to say maybe somebody doesn't have that, but spray paint art. And if anybody wants to see your art, I actually have it in my office featured. You are incredible. Anybody else do spray paint art? Anybody else? You got a couple over there, Tito. You guys can get together and give me more art for my office. I love it. All right. So, by the way, are any of these, are there hobbies in the Bible? Yes. Prove it. Fishing. That's good. That's good. That's really good. Although, according to the IRS definition, it may or may not have been a hobby. It may or may not have been. What do you think? Archery. Yeah, okay. Music. Music's in there. The music, by the way, what would that one fall into? Which category does that fall into? Creative. Yeah, I like that, okay. Food and drink, what? Poetry. Oh, that's beautiful, yeah. What? Making friends. It's a hobby. I love it. By the way, as you look at all those categories, does anybody else get nervous when you get asked about your hobbies? I always feel a little judged when somebody says, what's your hobbies? Because I just feel like they're asking me and they're going to judge what I say. And I'm like, oh, I like to read. And they're like, it's not a hobby. It is a hobby. And then they're like, oh, you're a nerd. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. I do. I like reading. The other thing that makes me nervous about hobbies is that the truth is that I have had like a million of them. Like, I'm not the guy that, like Sylvia says, once you start drawing, you can't stop. I found a way. I started off collecting rocks around the age of 5 or 6, you know, the ones out of your driveway that you're sure have been overlooked by the people who put them there, right? They're like, this has got to be worth something. Turns out, no. Coins, insects, you know, just I've run through so many different ones. And by the way, Steve, I want you to know, first service, there was a Pokemon collector. Just letting you know. I told him that you two need to connect. All right. So look, if you're like me, you kind of worry about, do I have a hobby? And a lot of times I think the hobbies that we don't think about, like I think about some people maybe collect, you know, nice Nike shoes maybe, I don't know, like they collect shoes and stuff like that. I don't know. That could be a hobby. I don't know. But the point is, most of you have a hobby. Some of you know you have a hobby. Some of you don't. But your spouse or the people who love you know that you've got the hobby. But hobbies are good for you. And one of the things I loved hearing recently was one of our church members a couple months ago is having a conversation. His name is Rob Roy. Some of you may know him. And Rob said something that was just it. I'd never heard somebody say something like what he said. It just caught my, he said, I like doing things I'm bad at. And I said, I don't. Tell me more. He's like, no. He said, I like taking on things that I'm not good at because it stretches me. It makes me try to use a different part of my brain than I normally use. I thought, that's so cool. And Rob told me one of the things he's been trying to figure out is watercolor painting. And he does a lot of traveling, a lot of flying. And so he'll take a little watercolor set with him on the plane, and he'll just try drawing while he's on the plane. And he'll tell you it's no good. I saw a picture. It looked pretty good to me because Rob's a pretty talented guy. But have you thought about that even when it comes to hobbies? Just trying out something that maybe you're not good at and just trying to improve and being okay with failure, because failure is actually not as bad as we think that it is. It teaches us things. But I also want to talk to you about another hobby. It's one that I had for many years before I was blown up by the Internal Revenue Service's definition, because I actually got paid to start actually covering this, and that's politics. Politics would kind of probably fall into the intellectual category. And here at Whole Life, we like to talk about things that are relevant and that are current and that are in the news. And I am going to sit down because I'm just going to feel a little bit better having a family talk. And when I sit down, it just feels like we're having a family conversation. So can we have a little bit of a family conversation right now? And if you start feeling a little nervous, a little uncomfortable, I want you to just lean into it. It's okay. But I didn't feel like I could do this sermon today or get in front of you today without talking about what happened last week in our country. Last Saturday, in case you weren't watching the news, all week long, last Saturday there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life. And I want to just unequivocally say we are in a horrible place in this nation when we start trying to solve our political differences through violence. And what happened to Donald Trump was absolutely heinous, unacceptable. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on, and it really horrified me, the people that were rejoicing. It's not okay. Not okay, no matter how you feel. Not okay. And a while ago, back in 2020, 2020 broke me in a lot of different ways, and I'm sure it broke many of you in a lot of different ways. And one of those ways is I got to a point where I just couldn't get on social media. And for those of you who may be following me on social media, you'll notice that I almost never post anything anymore, just because it's just so much. I just got to a point where reading things mean things being said about me, about other people, about people I care about people I don't care about, it just got a little bit much. And I think it comes a little bit out of this definition that I'm putting up on the screen right now. This political scientist, Aiton Hirsch from Tufts University, was on a podcast in 2020. And on the podcast, he was talking about what he called political hobbyism. It's following politics as a kind of entertainment and expression of self-identity. And Aiton said, according to his research in 2020, 1/3 of the people in the United States were spending at least 2 hours a day reading or talking about politics. And I suspect in this election year, those numbers may be the same or even greater. And as your friend, what I want to address right now is not because I've been on any of your social media and have any concern. I didn't stalk you this last week to see what you were saying. But I did break my rule and get on social media for a little while this last week. And what I kind of did see across the broader spectrum was kind of horrifying to me. The level of vitriol, anger, hate, meanness, told me that people's identity is getting wrapped up in something maybe it shouldn't be. And I felt like I'd just like to have a family talk with you. Because while I don't see it happening now, what I've discovered in my short life is that what you don't talk about becomes a problem. And if we can talk about it, we can work on it together. And what I don't want to see happen is what's happening in many places in the United States where people are losing friends, losing the people they care about, because they quit caring because their party, their whatever becomes more important than their friendships, their family. And so I just wanted to talk about it for a little bit today, about when hobbies go wrong. When hobbies become our identity instead of just something that we do to bring some time into our life to grow and to do other things, when it becomes an identity, when it takes over. So here's the first thing I want to say. And these are kind of some ideas that I have that I think will keep us as a family united. And I'd love it if you'd think whether you can agree with these to be a part of this. The first thing that I would like to suggest is that our identity is in Jesus first, and everything else is a very distant second. I am proud of being a husband and a father. Those are good identity things. But I'm a Jesus follower first. And being a follower of Jesus doesn't diminish me being a husband and father, it actually enhances it. But when I become more obsessed with being a dad and a husband, I've found that often leads me in directions that aren't as healthy as I'd like to think they are when I leave Jesus out of that equation. And so family, can we just agree as a family that following Jesus is more important than the political nature of the person who sits next to you? That you care more about being a fellow family member in Jesus' family than being a part of the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, the Independent Party, Libertarian Party, the Green Party, whatever your flavor is. Jesus first. Jesus is my identity. First, far above everything else. The second thing I wonder if we could agree to is that we behave like Jesus. So if Jesus is my identity first, being a follower of Jesus is my first identity, then can I also agree that means I need to behave like Jesus? Now, when Jesus says these things, what I'm about to read, I also want to make a point. It's easy for me to say some of the things I'm about to say, okay? I think I've lived a pretty blessed life. I feel like my life's been pretty good. People haven't come after me. I tend to be in the, kind of more of the majority generally where I'm at. So what I'm about to say, I don't want to take it lightly. I know that for some of you, when it means behaving like Jesus, it means you've got to go well beyond what I'm having to go beyond to behave like Jesus. When Jesus says, you've heard the law that says love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good and sends the rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you only love those who love you, what reward is there in that? Even corrupt tax collectors, IRS, do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even the pagans do that. Let's be different. Let's behave like Jesus. And again, I want to admit, it's easy for me to say that when I'm not feeling particularly persecuted. But there are those of you who are going through, politics matters. Who gets voted in this next election for you may have a major impact on how you can live your life and the things that you think should be done and it's a big thing. And I don't want to diminish you. I don't want to take that away. But I do want to say, can we still behave like Jesus? Can you stand up for what you believe in, but in a loving way like Jesus did? That's what I want to try to do. I want to be loving. And that's one of the reasons why I'm asking you not to behave like Ken. I'm asking you to behave like Jesus. Jesus was a part of a minority group. Jesus was in a country that was being oppressed by a foreign conqueror. Jesus was wrongly accused and wrongly executed. Jesus spread out his arms, and instead of cursing the people who were doing something awful to him, he said, Father, forgive them. That's what I aspire to. And it's what I hope we as a family aspire to. The next thing I want to ask you to do is believe that Jesus' kingdom is not of this earth. When he was talking to Pilate, Jesus said, my kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. If it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders, but my kingdom is not of this world. And some of you who are very familiar with Jesus' sayings will say, okay, that's fine, Ken, but you're ignoring the text where Jesus said, yeah, the kingdom is here, the kingdom is now. So what does that mean? What does it mean that Jesus' kingdom, Jesus says, my kingdom is here on this earth, it is now, it's among you. I want to suggest to you what it means is this. Each one of you are little bearers of God's kingdom wherever you go if you are a follower of Christ. And that means God's kingdom is in you and you take that kingdom wherever you go. But that kingdom is not like the kingdoms of this earth. In the kingdoms of this earth, it's about power. It's about prestige. It's about who's most important. It's about imposing my will on other people and making sure that things are done the way that I want them to be done. That's how earthly kingdoms work. Jesus' kingdom is the opposite of that. That's why it's not of this world. Jesus told his disciples that if you want to be the greatest in my kingdom, you need to become the servant of everybody else. That means the servant puts aside their needs and serves the needs of others. That's some hard theology, friends. But Jesus' kingdom is not of this earth. And for anyone who thinks that the Republican Party or the Democrat Party or the Independent Party or the Libertarians are the answer to this world's problems, you have not read your Bible. There is not a human solution to the sin problem. There's only a Jesus solution. And Jesus is humble and lowly and the servant of all. The final thing I want to suggest to you is that we believe that God is ultimately in control and wins. In October, I'm going to be doing a series of sermons at the height of the election fervor, and I chose it on purpose. I'm talking about Daniel, and I'm talking about Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm talking about Darius, and I'm talking specifically about the kings, the earthly powers that Daniel had to interact with. But the main message that you're going to get out of this, I hope, will be just the simple one in Daniel 2, verse 20. Praise the name of the Lord forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. So when your candidate isn't elected, it doesn't mean that God has lost control. Even if it's somebody that you believe to be vile and horrible, which right now both sides believe the other candidate is vile and horrible. God is still running this universe. He is still running this world. He is still running this nation. He is still running the state of Florida. He is still in Orlando, and he is most certainly here at Whole Life Church. God is in control. And even for a time, if we have to suffer persecution, that does not mean that God has lost control. It just means that we're waiting for the final win. That's it. Because God wins in the end. God wins. So family, as we go into this, as we continue on in this election season, as we walk through the events of the last week, as we say what happened to Donald Trump in Pennsylvania was absolutely unacceptable. As we say these things, can we agree on these things? Because family, the worst thing that could happen in my mind is for any of you to not come to church here because you didn't want to see another one of your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, your fellow family members, because you're divided over politics. What we are accomplishing at Whole Life is too important for that. We've got a bigger goal. I truly believe Jesus has the answer for what this world needs. And if he's in us, we have the answer. And everywhere you go, you take it with you. So family, will do this by remembering that our identity is in Jesus first. Everything else is distant second. That as we go about our day, as we post on our social media, as we interact with others, that we will behave like Jesus. That we'll believe that Jesus' kingdom is not of this earth, or at least not the way this earth does things, and that we believe that ultimately God wins and is in control. If we can do that, we'll make it through this election cycle. And we'll come out on the other side better friends, even when we very much disagree politically. Family, two closing verses that I want to close off with. And this is my prayer for you, really. I'm doing a mashup of Philippians 4 and Colossians 3. And now, Whole Life family, one final thing. One final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable in all your hobbies, including the political. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Let the message about Christ in all of its richness fill your life. Teach and counsel each other with all wisdom that he gives. Sing songs and hymns and spiritual songs to God with a thankful heart, even during an election season. And whatever you do or say, family, hear this. Whatever you do or say and post on social media, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father.
Good afternoon, Pastor Ken.
Hey, Gabby.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Thank you for the family talk.
Yeah.
As somebody who hasn't sworn off social media, even though I probably should, it was a good, reminder to just take myself off sometimes.
There's no judgment in being on social media.
No.
I just, for me, it got to a place where it was not healthy. So
Right.
I needed to do that for me.
No, and we appreciate it. We've got lots of questions that came in. I'm going to start with Tony, who asks, how do you reconcile that what you believe politically says a lot about how you walk the walk and not just talk about living the teachings of Jesus? Wow, I'm sorry. Do you want me to reread it?
So no, I think I know.
Gosh.
I think I understand what's being said.
Okay.
You tell me if you think I got it right. Basically, how do you justify the idea that your political views are a reflection of your Christian values?
That. Yep.
Okay. Well, so far I haven't found a party that perfectly embodied my Christian values. There are things about the Democrats that embody my Christian values better than the Republicans and vice versa. Libertarians, blah, blah, blah. And believe me, I am a political junkie and I will be glad to debate this with you. There are things that both parties do that I think are absolutely inexcusable as Christians, the two major parties. But I also believe that we live in a world where, and let me rephrase that. I believe we live in a country where we have decided that we want to be tolerant of people with a wide variety of different beliefs. And what I've found to be a very guiding principle in my life is I do not want to take away the freedom somebody else has that I wouldn't want taken away from me. And I believe God is a God of freedom and free will. And all too often, what happens in politics is we try to control other people. Now, there's a time to control when it's causing hurt and pain, and we'll debate over what that looks like. And I think there's a good place. I'm not here to disparage politics. Have your political views. Be strong. Defend them. Be like Jesus. Jesus spoke out. Jesus called out injustice when he saw it. But he did it in a loving way. He did it in a way that never cut out the possibility of relationship. And so just my encouragement to you is have your strong political beliefs. That you should. But never get Christianity confused with a party. It's not the same thing.
So I like what you say about, be strong in your beliefs.
Yeah.
But how, somebody else asked, it kind of bridges right into it, how could you approach a friend or family member who is being negatively affected by political hobbyism?
By loving them unconditionally. And there's also a time where you say, hey, we're not going to talk about this anymore because it's not okay. And unfortunately, these are conversations that are all too real in the United States. I mean, there's times where you're just going to have to say, look, if this is where the conversation is going to go, I'm going to have to go. Because I don't want to be angry and I don't want to be mean. I don't want to say things that I'm going to regret later. Can we please just talk about something else? And if not, then that's where the boundary is, where I'm going to have to get up and go. And at that point, it's the other person's choice when they want to re-engage in that relationship. If it's more important for them to talk about politics than it is to be in a relationship with you. And that's hard stuff. And family, like I said, I'm not coming at this from somebody who's just been a pastor, that's all they know. I covered politics professionally as a reporter. I have interviewed some very, very powerful people through the years in politics on both sides of the aisle. And the one thing I came away convinced of as somebody who covered politics is that there are some genuinely wonderful people on both sides of the aisle. And there are some genuinely evil people on both sides of the aisle. And I think it's important for us to believe that there are people who are sincerely wrong with their opinion, but they're sincere. They're coming at it from a good place, even though maybe they're wrong. And those are the kind of people that I just want to have loving conversations with and say, hey, this is how I see it. I've had people in my life that have pushed back on me and said, hey, Ken, what about this? What about that? And it's helped me see different vantage points. And I think it's really dangerous when we put ourselves in these little silos, these echo chambers, where all we're hearing is the stuff that we want to hear. And we live in a technological time where that's being forced on you. It's dangerous to only hear your own opinion. It just reinforces it, and there's so much information out there. So my encouragement is have friends that think different than you do, and believe the truth that they're just genuinely good people who disagree with you. And maybe they're right, maybe you're wrong, and maybe you're right, maybe they're wrong. But love them, especially when they want to love you.
These family talks are good.
Hi, this is Randy McGray, podcast producer and host here at Whole Life Church. Loving people into a lifelong friendship with God is our mission at the Whole Life Church, and our podcasts are designed to help facilitate conversations that help us grow together in that pursuit. Now that you've heard the message for this week, don't forget to check out the Whole Life takeaways for this message. Swipe up in today's show notes and join the conversation. Speaking of conversations, each Wednesday morning we take a closer look at the week's message. That's right, the one you just listened to. We discuss practical ways to apply spiritual lessons and ask honest questions about the issues we face as Christians, all focused through the lens of grace. Your voice is a welcomed addition to that conversation. We encourage your thoughts and your questions by sending a voicemail or text to 407-965-1607 or send an email to podcast@wholelife.church. You can find everything podcast related on our website, wholelife.church/podcast. And plan on spending every Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning with us as we bring you the Whole Life Church inspiration you love straight into your headphones. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.